say what up, Headspace coming to you, Mzansi Rap 101, I'll date all the time, you know how we do it. It's Vision, your brother from the ancient mother, once again, coming with it. Ta-Kaizer?
So chilo mo some Ta-Kaizer.
Unifuna na uzichaza Ta-Kaizer.
Sing like Ta-Kaizer, like Akanis.
Excuse the redundancy. But today's topic is exciting for me because I want us to go very political today. I've always tried to make the Headspace a little bit political. Like now I openly admit it. And by political, here's what I mean. And I want our subscribers to understand this real quick,
Yeah.
Dead Press have a track that I like called Sharpshooters. Well, I think it was one of these mixtapes. And when it starts, Stickman goes, everything is politics. I live by that mantra. When we're talking about politics, we're not talking about policies that extend to the governing of how we live. We are, but in a greater sense, in the most greater sense, politics are the dynamics of power everywhere. Because everywhere you go, people try to manage relationships, and relationships are about how we work together. So really, politics is the art of working together. In hip-hop, we will need to know how to work together. In South African hip-hop, we will have to understand the best way we can work together to grow the culture. In other words, that is the politics of the culture. But today I want to speak directly to the issue of our socio-economic setup, because we are a channel about South African hip-hop. And yet, if this hip-hop operates in South Africa, why are we not talking about the kind of political influences that determine what the music becomes, how it's able to succeed, and who the movers and shakers are able to be? So I want us to talk about politics, privilege, and success. These three things. And I'll tell you how they relate. South Africa is famously a country that supposedly toppled a oppressive government by galvanizing the whole world to protest against the apartheid government, freeing Mandela, which set into momentum a series of events that allowed for the ANC to govern. But in
this so-called rainbow
nation. The so-called rainbow nation. And in this creation of this rainbow nation, what we then began to figure out as South Africans as we lived in the so-called rainbow is that it really wasn't colorful at all. It was really still black and white. And this black and whiteness was still being entrenched by the fact that the foundations of what set this so-called freedom were not authentic foundations of people fighting to get to the best place they could through their own power and will. Ultimately, South Africa was decided in a little room with only a few people determining the futures of many. So without even going into CODESA, the ANC and the negotiations and the, what many people would call the great compromise of how our struggle stalwarts literally sat down with what many people perceived was the enemy to negotiate the future of the country. So literally sitting down with your former arch rival to try and come to a peaceful agreement. And I feel like the morality of this is always pushed forward as the best alternative, because other than that, what would we have had? A civil war?
The civil war.
Right? So the alternative was, this was the most peaceful way to get into a new South Africa. And it might have not been ideal in a lot of ways. The land didn't return back to us. And as a result of the land not returning back to us, the resources and the actual economic power didn't return to us.
The white people still retained it.
Right. Now, itibana njani hip-hop lewe guys ne? Itibana uhlobo ukuba hip-hop operates within the framework of a music industry. South Africa's music industry, with your major labels, your gallows, is a traditionally white-owned space. Right? Because the music industry in Africa, in South Africa, was established, was almost superimposed, if you will, by Europeans who used to study Africans like anthropological objects and record their music and send them to Europe. We've all heard, the famous story of Solomon Linda and how till this day he never got his royalties for writing Imbube, which the Americans later turned to the lion sleeps tonight.
Okay, yeah.
That's just one of the many examples of how white oppression has exploited the culture of Africans in order to configure our culture into something that they can benefit from. And I feel like it's no different. I feel like behind every success story, if you look at AKA, if you look at Casper Nyovest, if you look at
Stogie T,
if you look at Stogie T, if you look at any rapper or any real successful, and when we talk about success, we mean like mainstream lucrative artists.
Yeah.
You will find that behind their success is an intricate web of money that leads directly to political connections or political families or people who are the children of struggle stalwarts or people who are friends with the children of struggle stalwarts. Because now we live in a world where because ANC inherited power and was given the authority to lead us into a new dimension, what they did with that power is something that we're beginning to see. We're beginning to see children of ANC struggle stalwarts really being in the thick of what is today's industry and media. And the common story is people with connected families being at the top of the top, and the rest of us being, if you're not in any way in a position of privilege, because this concept of privilege ibalulekile Ta-Kaizer, and ibalulekile in a sense that we all have privilege.
Yeah.
You know, we all have privilege in a sense. So
right.
we talk about white privilege, which is the privilege of being able to live a better life simply because you were born to people who were not oppressed, who were not dispossessed, and who were not put in a situation of struggle.
And so how are we privileged?
We are privileged in a sense where there's different kinds of privilege. There's male privilege.
Oh, okay, I understand.
You know, there's class privilege. There are people, Ta-Kaizer, who might have not even been able to go to school. So going to school is a privilege. So privilege simply means a way in which your life is significantly given a better quality by a certain social status that you occupy. So for instance, the social status of being a man allows us in most instances to walk into certain rooms that most women couldn't. You know, because of our sexist agenda. You know, race does that. So really, there are three kinds of privilege. You get your racial privilege, you get your gender privilege, and you get your class privilege. So these are all also relevant in hip-hop because it has been very difficult for rappers, for instance, who are not male to truly make an impact. You know? It has still been difficult.
It's still difficult.
It's
We've never had in South Africa actually. The closest was Muslim. Is it Muslim? Who actually closest to being Jeba, to be
a female rap
superstar,
so to speak.
Everyone else is just Upa.
No doubt. And the one thing you notice is that those who make it into the stratosphere of being rap female superstars often have to do it by sexualizing themselves. So now still, the only way for a woman to make it is by succumbing to the fact that she is attractive to men. So now that becomes her thing. Instead of her talent and her story, her thing is about her ass, her tits, and the shape of her body.
Kind of reminds me of Gigi Lamaine.
Exactly.
When she came out, she was like, I know now. And so was this cool way. So was be flashy and what.
And then all of a sudden, how much did that really ice cream?
Yeah, much did that ice cream. All of a sudden now she's like, no, what you said.
What happened to the old Gigi?
She's like, no, I'm just being a confident in my body.
You understand?
Okay, cool.
You know, and
we're not as
Ateka the structures that allow for great artists like Gigi Lamayne to have to adapt into that kind of climate. Because if an artist says this one moment and that one moment, yes, it can be seen as evolution, but also it addresses what we are honing into right now, which is the issue of politics, privilege, and how it influences who succeeds, who gets to succeed. So I want us to use examples of artists that have been famous and artists that have succeeded to illustrate this to our subscribers.
Okay, so who do we start with?
I want us to start with South Africa's old school hip hop chapter and analyze how we had established in our last episode when we did the top 5 old school albums, that really the album that set a precedent for South African hip hop to become recognized and embraced by the general mass was Mkuku Function. And I feel like behind the success of Mkuku Function were people in the backdrop. And I want to talk about a significant figure by the name of Usipho Sithole. Usipho Sithole, for those who don't know, actively involved in the political struggle, was able to then leverage himself into a space of business. This is somebody who's worked in a landscape that stretches all the way to being part of PRASA, to being part of the SABC, to then being part of Gallo Records, which is how it ties into hip hop. Sipho Sithole's tenure at Gallo Records was circa 2004-05. This is exactly the time
of Opro Kid, or Double HP,
you name
it. Afro.
And Sipho Sithole later started his own record label known as Native Rhythms, which gave us artists such as Ozulu Boy. Ozulu Boy. You name it.
You
understand?
Yeah.
Did his thing with the tree. So this is somebody who, number one, has a deep love for hip hop as an art form and has always in public platforms and even on social media expressed the fact that the power of hip hop in America was its ability to mobilize politically.
Yes.
I emphasize this all the time. For me, the way I define hip hop is artistic empowerment. Hip hop was created to empower self and to empower community. So with going along with this core value of empowerment, Sipho Sithole seeks to use hip hop in the South African context to empower culturally and to allow South Africans to understand how hip hop can work for us. And he's been very strict on certain things. Let's call them his policies. His policies are being true to your indigenous heritage. And this might not necessarily mean rapping in your mother tongue, but it definitely does mean having narratives that address the things that are going in your country and not simply moving with global trend. So Sipho Sithole's role in politics is what allows him to have the power, to have the connections, to have the wide-spreading reach, to allow for artists like the ones that we've mentioned to even be able to get to a stratosphere of real fame. And this is what I want our subscribers to understand. Heads don't look at the success of an artist and immediately try and think, what are the pieces that allow for this success to happen? And what I want this episode to be is maybe a teaser into probing people into thinking about the state of our country. Because there are people like Obabu Sipho Sithole whose intentions are in a place of empowerment and who have manifested great successes by sending us into a more localized, indigenous, maybe you can call it patriotic, maybe you can call it nationalistic, maybe you can even call it authentic direction. But also because he has to also wear the head of a businessman. Business is a shrewd thing, and there have been many cries about, you know, Sipho Sithole's
business
etiquette as a record label exec. And maybe today we will not so much dwell into
that,
what that is about, but it's about the fact that politics is polarizing. Because again, it's about how people treat each other, and nobody is loved by everybody.
Obviously,
there are moments in which we fail those we love. there are moments in which we fail ourselves. And I think Sipho Sithole, just by virtue of being a man and a human being, is also prone to the very same mistakes anybody is prone to. But what this episode is about is the politics of Sipho Sithole allowed for a privilege that gave artists like the Pro Kids and like the squatter camps
Ozulu Boy,
an opportunity to thrive. So think about that next time. Does this mean that when you are an artist, you need to consider the connections you have? I say yes. What do you say?
No, you obviously, and I wanted to touch on that what you were talking about. How when he succeeds in this like hip hop, we have to think about the people epic. No, what I always love, it's this conspiracy theories about Kutuabandu, they sold their souls. Illuminati. But people, because AKA do come out, they are blatantly ANC,
right?
And they get booked on every ANC la loca.
Yeah.
It's got nothing to do with selling your soul.
Yeah.
So I wanted to touch on that.
I like the fact that you took it to the Illuminati, because what I want to say to our subscribers is even if there exists some kind of secret society where people perform weird rituals at night using babies and children to harvest blood and garner power, I feel like the most powerful Illuminati we can see with our own eyes is the fact that politics is the governing of the masses by a particular ruling elite, a group of few people governing many people. That right there is Illuminati. In your basic sense. Yeah. Illuminati, councillor yako, xa ingafuni in your neighborhood to do important community things because you as a people don't get to decide what happens in those boardrooms. Yeah. Illuminati is the fact that the content we get is not something we truly decide. It's something that is garnered from stats that are used by professionals who regurgitate a content that wants to drive mainly a corporate agenda, because what capitalism is driven by is corporate power. Every rapper now might want to wear a label, but it is more likely the label that will approach the rapper by understanding the power of hip-hop. So now we should know rap is not exempt from this. We can't talk about cats selling out if the whole world has now been transitioned into a system of selling. You can't escape it. You can't escape it. If cats are selling out, what's the opposite of that? Selling in.
Selling in.
So you're selling either way.
Yeah, so
that's my point. You know?
Yeah.
So if AKA might be selling out, but that means you're selling in. Because you're selling into a particular ideology and he might be selling out of it. And in a sense, he might be transcending what you are still being limited by. I'll give you an example. You might be more interested with using your music as a tool to directly on the grassroots, Ta-Kaizer, empower communities just by being you. And AKA by having the backing of corporates is selling sneakers. So now he gets to not only make music but use his music to expand his brand and sell people anything. He could be ridiculous. He could release a line of underwear with AKA,
with AKA
on the waist, and the Megacy would buy it. You know, he could release Megacy limited edition spandex wear or whatever. But this is the kind of power we're in. This is what privilege allows, and this is how the privilege drives the success. So number one, I think in moving with this conversation, what we're learning is everything is political.
Yes.
And because everything is political, artists need to understand the politics of their country and they need to understand the politics of their dreams. Because if you want to be a rapper, if you want to be a DJ, if you want to be a graffiti artist, you are going to go into places where you have to get the resources. And the spaces that where you get to resources are owned by people who have their own agendas. And you're going to have to understand, do I, in order to make an income, not only do graph on the streets, but have gallery exhibitions? So I have to work with the system of a gallery, which is a traditionally white-owned imperialist structure that was used to funnel African art and sell it back to Europeans and now regurgitate it back to us. For an example. So what I'm trying to say, is that our core art form engenazi political implications. Really, what we've been struggling with most of this time when we say, why are only certain artists getting to be on TV? Why is there only like a limited amount of like maybe 5 famous rappers every 10 years?
Every 10 years.
You know, that's because of the kind of system we exist in. So ultimately, I think here is our most important question. If everything is political, if the art I'm going into has political limitations and I'm going to have to understand who rules what, where and how as an artist to function, it then begs the question, what does success mean in a system like that? See, now we've addressed the politics and the power structure that it mandates. Now we've addressed the privilege it creates. So now let's go into it. How can we truly succeed? Everybody wants to succeed. It's a human impulse. We all want to make it, guys. We all want to be something. So particularly those who want to be something within hip-hop. Let's ask this question. How can we be the next Ricky Rick? How can we be the next Squatter Camp? How can I be the next... How can I be myself and still be me if I am not Tumi Molekane, whose family comes from a struggle. And, you know, and as a result of his migration and being connected with being an exile baby and coming back, it puts him in a position where his mother has funds that most black parents might not to buy their son equipment to have a studio. If I'm not Leslie Mampe Jr., whose father is also a well-known politician and businessman, maybe I can't have the money to collaborate with Makip Kips and become an overnight influencing sensation. And listen, the one thing I need to say is, by pointing out people's privilege, we are not discrediting the work they put in. We're simply making them account to the fact that as much as they might be creative and hardworking, they are in a position where it's easier for them than the
all they had to do was do the work, and the backing is there.
Is already there. Most people could work and work and work, and it doesn't happen. So let's address this one question. What does this mean? How can you succeed?
How can you succeed? What is success?
Ta-Kaizer, capitalism, industry culture, the politics of this world is driven by consumerism. Ukuthenga, nokuthengisa. And siyathengiselwa, we are sold a dream, an idea of what it means
to be successful.
And a lot of the times, this dream is about selling products, not about living. So for instance, if Coca-Cola wants to make money, oh my God, if a certain drink brand, maybe one day we'll need Coke, I'm sorry. We need this politics. So if a certain beverage wants to make money, they will have to create the impression that drinking their beverage is in some way reflective of being successful. Only successful people drink. You know what I mean? So this is what capitalism does, and this is where advertising and media and art and entertainment play a role. Artists are used as tools to sell people an idea of success that is being famous and having fortune. Being rich and being well known and well respected by a wide group of people. This is the image we're always seeing. Whether it's a woman walking out of a door and men turning at her because somehow it's a spray as fagileyo is just irresistible, or a guy who's just so irresistible that when he drinks this particular beer, the women have to say, my God, that's a man in Yambaula right now, let's go to your room and let's fuck. So this idea
of success,
but I think success, Ta-Kaizer, has to be brought on a practical level. On a practical level, the average person does not have fame and fortune. What the average person strives to do, and by average I mean regular, I mean most, I mean
striving to survive.
Those who are not part of the ruling elite. People are just striving to survive. And the only thing they want is just give me enough. Enough to feed my family. Enough to send my kids to school. Enough to be able to fuel the dreams of the next generation. Enough.
So if you're an artist and you can do all those things, if awulalo ngatyanga and your kids are fed,
if you're a kid,
and you do, and through your art, that's success.
And I feel like artists who are currently doing that don't get enough credit because they are not splashy and they're not trying to come across as living the luxurious lifestyle. They're not opulent, you know. They're just living everyday lives. Hardly do we see the rappers that live in regular houses, that drive regular cars, you know. Out could be Polo.
It could be Polo,
you know, and he drives his Polo to his gigs, and he gets enough for a gig to go back and feed his family. But hip hop is feeding him, and hip hop is feeding her, you know. And to our headspaces, that's success, guys. Because if you want something beyond the ability to sustain yourself, what you want is not success. It's fame and fortune.
You need the fame.
Casper is famous, and he might be rich. I don't know, but this is what he claims to be. You know, sometimes wealth is sold to us, whereas artists are being sponsored. Who knows? That Bentley might not be his. It might be Bentley using Casper to sell. You know, that house might not be his. It might be a certain real estate company. And you know, if Casper's rich, he doesn't have to worry about all the shit I'm saying. Because my point is that capitalism creates illusions. And what we want is to always come back to reality. The reality is we want to be hip-hop heads, be South African, and be sustainable. So for all you MCs out there, for you graph artists, for you B-boys, for everybody, for every practitioner of hip-hop in South Africa, the goal is to just survive. If you get enough to fuel you to keep on doing it, you are doing the most, not only for yourself, but others are watching and others want to be like you. Beyond that, we're entering into the realm that might not actually be of our own doing. Maybe the debt and the kind of problems that come with long money are more complicated than just living a simple life. Think about that. So Ta-Kaizer,
I'm just gonna reiterate look, if you eating through your art, Ukraine, you don't need, like he said, you don't need 2 Bentleys, really. If you think about it, you don't need 2 Porsche. You don't need even a Rolex watch to show who you successful. No.
And I mean, if that's your thing, cool also. You know, if that's what you want in life, cool. But always remember that that's not the most important thing. The most important thing is sustainability and being able to develop relationships at large with people and sustain those relationships and live a relatively decent life. You know, where people respect you and you respect people right back.
Be an inspiration, Baba, to the next generation. That's all. Like there is always that area by that
or la sister.
You know, you are trying to be sexist.
Privilege.
That's the thing.
And this is why I love about conversations like these. They conscientize us, they conscientize our subscribers. This is a back and forth, guys. We are, and when I say guys, I don't mean men. You know, this is a back and forth about growing, developing, and evolving, and learning from each other. And another point before we close this discussion off, all of the artists that we've mentioned who come from families that are politically affiliated, politically connected, this has not been an expose to smear them and to make them seem like trust fund babies. It's an episode that we devised and thought about because these are the people that help us. Without that friend who has connections, maybe it's not possible for other people who don't have the connections to come in. So without it, Tumi Mulekane, perhaps we would have never had a reason. Perhaps we would have never had a something Soweto. So I mean, these people open the gates for us because it's not the privilege that's the problem, it's how you use it. Because again, we said we all have privilege. So it's not ubudoda that's the problem, it's how you use ubudoda bakho. It's not uba nemali bakho that's the problem, it's how you use imali yakho. You know, it's not uba ngumlungu bakho okanye uba ngumuntu omnyama bakho that's the problem. It's ubulungu okanye ubumnyama bakho, how do you manifest it into the world? If you're using the privilege you have, little or large, to oppress others and make their lives difficult, but if you're using it to empower and help and try in some way develop those who have been previously disadvantaged or currently struggling, then you are definitely what we can refer to as somebody who's using the politics, the privilege
and the
success for reasons that develop the culture. Vijay, your brother from the Ancient Mother, salute.
Ta-Kaizer ningalibali uthetha nathi phaa on the comment section. Thethe yonke nifuna uyithetha nathi saniphendula. Who knows, we might do another episode on the comments.
These political. And the last thing I want to say, Ta-Kaizer, is when we do the Headspace, our subscribers have the power. Our subscribers have the privilege to whether or not we succeed. So politics here too is very much driven by you guys. We serve you, and as a result, our growth depends on you subscribing, putting them likes, and sharing this doctrine for South African hip hop. I've had enough. What's up?
Peace.